When I started exploring Ohio's forgotten towns, I didn't expect them to feel this unsettling. There's something different about these places, something you only understand when you're standing alone on an empty road, hearing nothing but the wind slipping through abandoned homes. Each town holds a strange mix of silence and history, like the past is still clinging to the walls. And the deeper you go, the more you feel it, that quiet pull that makes you wonder who walked here last, and why they left. These aren't just remote towns, they're the kind of places that stay with you long after you leave. If you love exploring abandoned places and uncovering hidden stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an adventure. 1 Moonville, Ohio. When I first stepped off the trail and walked toward what used to be Moonville, the air felt strangely heavier, like the forest itself was watching who had entered. I had seen photos of the old railroad town before coming here, but nothing prepares you for how deeply isolated this place truly is. Trees crowd every direction, and the silence sits on your skin in a way that feels almost unnatural. I remember thinking that this was the kind of quiet that only exists where life has already moved on. As I moved closer to the old rail line, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes sounded too loud, like I was disturbing something that preferred to stay undisturbed. The first thing I saw was the broken foundation of one of the old homes, stones covered in moss, half swallowed by years of rain and falling leaves. Standing there, I tried to imagine the miners who once lived here, men walking home after long night shifts, children playing along these same tracks, lamps glowing inside wooden cabins. It felt impossible that a place once filled with so much movement could now feel this forgotten. The deeper I walked, the more I felt that strange mix of curiosity and unease. I kept telling myself it was just the isolation, but something about Moonville carries its own weight. By the time I reached the tunnel, the sun had dipped behind the hills, stretching long shadows across the entrance. The tunnel looked darker than it should have, like the black inside it wasn't just the absence of light but something thicker, something that had been collecting there for decades. When I stepped inside, the temperature dropped immediately. My breath echoed back at me, bouncing off the old brick walls. About halfway through, I heard the faintest sound, like a footstep dragging on stone. I froze. My first instinct was to tell myself it was water dripping, or maybe a small rock falling from above, but my brain wouldn't accept that. There's a moment when a sound doesn't match the place you're in, and instinct takes over. I remember tightening my backpack strap and forcing myself to keep walking, even though every part of me wanted to turn around. By the time I reached the other end, the sky outside looked brighter than it should have, almost like stepping out of the tunnel was stepping back into the world. I stood there for a moment, looking back into that long dark stretch, and I felt something I still can't fully explain, like the past was still lingering inside, waiting for whoever dared to walk through. I left Moonville with a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear exactly, but an awareness that some places never truly become empty. They hold on to the memories of the people who once lived there, and sometimes, when you walk through them, you feel those memories brushing against you, reminding you they're not gone. 2 Utopia, Ohio. When I first drove into Utopia, it didn't feel like a town at all. It felt more like a place time had forgotten to take with it. The road was quiet, almost too quiet, and the houses that still stood looked like they were holding on out of stubbornness rather than strength. I remember slowing my car without even thinking, as if the silence itself was telling me not to rush. The air felt strangely open, like a story was waiting to be told but didn't want to speak too loudly. I parked near what used to be the heart of the old commune. Standing there, I tried to imagine what this place looked like in the 1840s, when people came here believing they had finally found a perfect life. The irony hit me harder than I expected, how a place built on hope could end up being a symbol of loss. As I walked closer to the river, the wind picked up and carried the smell of water and old soil. It was calm, but in a way that made you wonder what had happened just beneath that still surface. The river looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but knowing the history changed the way it felt. I kept thinking about the night the commune members gathered in that brick building, believing they were safe from the rising water. I tried to picture their lanterns glowing, their voices carrying softly through the walls. And then I imagined that sudden moment, the crash of the river breaking in, the panic, the darkness swallowing everything. Even now, standing outside in daylight, I felt that story pressing against me like the air remembered their fear. As I moved along the shoreline, the ground felt uneven, as if parts of the past were still shifting beneath my feet. It's strange how a place can feel empty but heavy at the same time. Every step made me more aware of how isolated Utopia really is. There were moments when I felt like someone was walking a few steps behind me, but each time I turned, it was just the wind stirring the tall grass. By the time I headed back toward my car, the sun had started dipping, casting long shadows across the empty land. I paused for a moment and looked around one last time. There was no sound, no movement, just that quiet stretch of Ohio land holding on to a story most people never hear. And as I left, I felt something I still can't explain, a mix of sadness and respect, like the place wasn't asking to be remembered, but it deserved to be. 3 Boston Mills, Helltown, Ohio. The first thing that struck me as I walked into Boston Mills, what people now call Helltown, was how strangely quiet a place with so many empty houses could be. The road curved slowly through the trees, and for a moment it felt like I was entering a neighborhood where everyone had just stepped out for a minute. But the longer I looked, the more I noticed the details that made it clear this place had been abandoned for decades: windows darkened with dust, doors slightly open, paint peeling like old paper left out in the rain. I remember stopping at one of the boarded-up homes and just standing there, trying to imagine what life looked like before the government buyout happened. Families packing up in a hurry, leaving behind porches that probably once heard laughter and summer evenings. Something about the stillness made it feel like the town never fully let go of the people who used to live here. It was like the shadows of their memories were still moving around, even if the houses no longer had anyone to shelter. As I walked deeper into the old streets, the woods grew thicker, almost as if nature was trying to swallow whatever remained. I felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease, the kind where you know nothing dangerous is actually around, but your mind keeps whispering that something is watching you from behind the trees. Every little noise felt louder than it should have. A branch snapping. Leaves shifting. Even my own footsteps sounded out of place. When I reached one of the old, blocked-off roads, the feeling hit me harder. The sun was dropping behind the hills, and the light turned the empty homes into silhouettes, dark shapes with hollow eyes. For a moment, I felt something crawl up my spine, not fear exactly, but a sense that this place still carried the weight of everyone who left it behind. I stood there without moving, listening to the soft wind pushing through the broken spaces between the boards. It almost sounded like someone breathing inside the house. I took a few more steps, and the road suddenly curved into a patch of thick forest. The shadows stretched long across the ground. I don't know why, but I felt the urge to turn back, like going any deeper would cross a line this town didn't want crossed. As I walked away, I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew no one was there. But that's the strange thing about Boston Mills, even in its silence, it makes you feel like the past is following you, step by step, until you finally leave its forgotten streets behind. For Cheshire, Ohio. When I first drove into Cheshire, the town felt strangely open, like someone had taken a real place and quietly emptied it out without disturbing anything. The streets were still there, the sidewalks still curved around the same corners, and the houses stood neatly in their rows, but almost no one lived in them anymore. It felt unsettling in a calm way, like walking into a memory instead of a town. I parked my car near an old mailbox that still had a faded family name on it, and for a moment, I wondered what it must have felt like for the people who had to leave everything behind. As I walked down the street, the sound of my footsteps felt too loud. Normally, in small towns, you hear dogs barking, someone mowing a lawn, kids shouting in the distance, but here, there was nothing. Just the slow hum of the river in the distance and the occasional creak of a loose shutter tapping against a window frame. I remember passing a house with a porch swing that was still moving slightly, even though the air wasn't strong enough to push it. That small movement sent a chill through me, not fear, but the kind of emotion that comes when you realize how suddenly life can leave a place. The closer I got to the plant on the edge of town, the heavier everything started to feel. I kept thinking about the buyout, the moment when an entire community agreed to leave because staying meant risking their health. Imagining families packing boxes, neighbors saying goodbye to each other, kids leaving behind their schools and favorite spots, it was impossible not to feel that weight pressing into the silence. I stopped near a house with curtains still hanging inside, and for a second it looked like someone might pull them back and look out. But of course, no one did. Walking further, I reached a small park, the kind that must have once been filled with laughter and weekend afternoons. The swings were still there, though rusted now, and when the wind picked up just enough, one of them let out a soft metallic squeak. It echoed across the empty field, and I swear it felt like hearing a leftover sound from another time. I stood there longer than I expected, just taking in the stillness, trying to imagine the last time children played there. By the time I made my way back, the sun had started dipping low, stretching long shadows across the abandoned yards. Cheshire didn't feel scary, just heartbreakingly quiet, like the town itself was holding on to the last traces of the people who once called it home. And as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that some places don't die suddenly, they fade slowly, carrying their stories in the silence they leave behind. 5 Shawnee, Ohio. The first time I walked into Shawnee, it felt like stepping into a photograph that someone forgot to finish. The air was thick with that old Appalachian smell, damp wood, coal dust, and the faint sweetness of wild plants growing wherever they could find space. The buildings stood close together, leaning slightly as if they were tired from holding up so many years of stories. I remember stopping near an old brick storefront with faded lettering, and for a moment, it felt like the past was standing right beside me. As I moved deeper into the street, every step made me feel more connected to the people who used to live here. Shawnee was once a proud mining town, full of noise and life. I could almost imagine the sound of boots hitting the ground, miners talking loudly after their shifts, and families gathering in front of their homes. But now, the sound of my own breath echoed more than anything else. The windows of many buildings were broken or missing entirely, and each empty space looked like an eye staring out at the world it no longer belonged to. I turned a corner and found myself near the old theater, the kind of place that must have once been the heart of the town. Its sign was still hanging, though barely, creaking softly when the wind pushed against it. The door was slightly open, just enough to tempt someone to look inside. I hesitated, but curiosity pulled me forward. Inside, the air was cool and smelled like dust and forgotten memories. Rows of seats were still there, though broken and slanted. I stood in the aisle, imagining the last show that ever played there, and the last person who walked out, not knowing it would never open again. As I stepped back outside, the sun was beginning to drop behind the hills, and the shadows stretched long across the narrow street. Shawnee doesn't feel haunted in the typical sense, it feels haunted by time itself. By the weight of a life that once existed and slowly slipped away. I walked past a small house with its porch collapsing inward, and for a second, I felt something shift inside me, like I was witnessing the last breaths of a place that once meant everything to the people who lived here. Walking back toward my car, I realized Shawnee isn't just abandoned, it's paused. Frozen. Holding memories it can't let go of. And as I left, I couldn't help but look back one more time. It felt like the town was quietly asking not to be forgotten, even as the hills slowly pull it into silence.